I think the first one is just that, like, not all pain equals harm. I think that's a huge thing that, obviously the general public has a hard time with, but I still think within our profession alone, people have a hard time with, and that I don't think that pain and fixing people's pain should be our main goal. I think improving people's function and making them smile and having fun and, promoting, like, a really good stimulus for physiological change should be our goal. We were taught in PT school that, like, pain is the 5th vital sign, and we were taught to ask it every 5 seconds. 0 to 10, what does that feel like to you? 0 to 10, what does that feel like to you? And all that does is continually keep pain at the forefront of somebody's mind who already is having a psychologically hard time detracting themselves from their pain experience.
Okay, and welcome to this episode of the MTB Performance Project. Really lucky to have Katie Dabrowski on the show today. Katie, thanks for your time.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah, my business partner is Frankie, and he is Frankie Telford, and he is the founder of Old Bull. He started Old Bull in 2015 in like the back corner of a Pilates studio with just like a bunch of kettlebells. And his background, he played football in college, and he's huge into lifting, huge into kettlebells, and he wanted to kind of create that like boutique feel of a
hmm
really one-on-one individualized personal training and like S&C facility. So that's what Old Bull started as. And eventually, when I graduated PT school in 2019, our paths crossed and we realized that we were extremely aligned. And I had started my own kind of small practice out of the gym that I was training clients at during PT school. But when I met Frankie and saw kind of already what he was creating with Old Bull, we realized pretty quickly that we were like, hey, this would make sense for us to do together. So in 2019, we kind of joined forces and brought in the more like hybrid side of things with bringing
hmm
in physical therapy and rehab in addition to just like really high quality training. And since then, we have two locations now and a third one in the works. So
That's
we've
awesome.
grown quite a bit, and it's been a blast.
I love to hear that. And we have physical therapy on site in my facility in New Jersey. And the value of that is so important. And it's such a great resource to our athletes and our clients to have that in house. I'm sure that's something that you saw right away with your collaboration with him and being able to apply that to like a really good functioning business model.
Yeah, and kind of our goal is we're really trying to show people more and more that there really isn't a difference between the two. Really good training and really good rehab, it really should look quite similar. And our goal kind of is like if you walk into Old Bull, you wouldn't be able to tell if somebody was there
Yeah.
for rehab or for training. And that's if we hit that mark, then we're like, yeah, okay, we the message is clear. We're doing what we want to do.
I love that. And now, from what I've gathered, you're a cash based practice.
Yeah, correct. From the very beginning, and that's how I started my first practice before meeting Frankie as well, which is interesting because it was at a time when I don't think it was as ubiquitous and as popular. So it was definitely a lot more explaining why it was different and why it was
Yeah.
better in the beginning.
Yeah.
Like we created kind of a lot of materials and like almost just like pitch materials to get people comfortable with why what we were doing was so different. It's been pretty surreal how much of a shift that's been because I don't really remember the last time I've had to almost like convince somebody why what we were doing was a better option than insurance. So that's been really cool. It's a very like Frankie and I were just talking about that the other day. And like, wow, that's what a full circle moment of people are now coming to us because of this instead of in spite of this. And I think it just shows you how the profession is shifting quite a bit.
Like you said, if you can have people come in and they can't tell the difference between good training and good PT, like you're doing your job. Other than and maybe the model that you've created from the get go, like what are some of the guiding principles that you feel have really been helpful in building your business to what it is now?
I think the biggest thing that Frankie and I talk about a lot, and it's something that I learned from him, really is just if you don't stray from your mission, you're going to be okay. And I think that's really something that happens a lot in this industry because it can be easy to maybe want to add services that could help your bottom line and give you some cash flow that might not be as aligned with what like your mission statement originally was or the type of care that you're trying to give. And I don't mean to say that anything is bad or wrong. It's more that for us, like our mission statement all along has been to change healthcare and to blend movement with what we do. And if we start offering things that kind of contradict that, then I think that's where people get into trouble. So that like just being really, really clear to our mission has really helped us like drive forward in the direction that we want and really curate the space that we want without maybe getting tripped up by like, oh, should we add this service? Should we add this thing? Everybody's doing this now. Should we do that? And we're just kind of keeping our heads down and focusing like, you know what, our two driving principles when every decision that we make clinically is, are we positively impacting somebody's psychology? And are we also positively impacting their physiology? Are we doing enough to make a change? And if something we're trying to implement doesn't answer yes to both of those questions, it's not right for us.
I love that. And I think that's something that anybody who's pursuing like a gym business or like a PT business, it's having that like guiding principle and like a common goal and running all your decision making through that filter. You know, when I started my business almost like 19 years ago, is I just wanted to work with athletes. And
Yes.
it's very common in the gym world where people get into strength and conditioning with the hope of just working with athletes. And then they quickly realize
Yeah.
how challenging that is to run like a
Yes.
year-long business. But it was never an option for me to pivot away from that. I mean, yes,
Yeah.
we work with adults, but it's very secondary to what we do
Yeah.
from working with athletes. But I can't agree with you more. Having those guiding principles and that common mission statement of who we serve, how we serve them, like if we can run it through that and make every decision based off of that, then we're constantly going to be moving in the right direction. So I can definitely appreciate that. So as somebody who's very passionate about coaching athletes and clients, but also wants to build a successful business, how do you, because I
Right.
know you go out and lecture and do all these things, like how do you find the balance between building yourself up as a coach and also building your business?
Oh god, I don't know. You are assuming that I have figured out the balance. That's so kind of you. No, I mean, this is probably the hardest part of it
Yeah.
all. And I have this conversation a lot with everybody in this industry because we have such a unique problem in quotations that we love what we do
Yeah.
so very much. And for most of us, like whether it's good or bad, it kind of becomes our identity and it's really something that we have so much passion about. So for me at least, it feels almost impossible to not kind of overwhelm myself with saying yes to things and getting involved in opportunities just because the passion is there and like how cool is it that we get to do a job that we love this much? That's a really big challenge for me if I'm being totally frank. My fiance always jokes with me. He's like, "What do you have 14 jobs?" Like I think it's something that we all run into. You know, I see patients, I teach some courses and seminars, I teach undergraduate students. There's like a lot of hats that we wear and I think over time, one of the best things that I've been able to implement is just like we suggest with our clients and our patients of making like bite-sized goals that are attainable and gradually changing things and progressing their training program. I try to use that when I'm trying to make changes and get better balance. So I use kind of small goals where that will help me maybe free up time in my schedule or create a schedule that makes more sense for me. Last year or last New Year's, like kind of my goal was to no longer see patients on Fridays and to open that day for like what we're doing right now, podcasts, meetings, things that I was kind of tacking on to the end of my day instead of having like a day reserved for it. And I stuck to that and I made that my goal. And it was like that was a game changer for me. So I think just like we encourage our clients to do these things when they're doing any sort of behavior change, like we have to look in the mirror and do it for ourselves. But it's really hard. Like I don't think I'm that good at it yet by any means. I think another big thing is just like utilizing the incredible team that we've built at Old Bull. I mean, the team that we have is just outrageous. Between the two locations, we have about 15 people, and every single person on the team has such a high level of expertise, is an exceptional communicator, does stuff that I get to see in the clinic and be like, oh, that's such a good idea. I can't wait to implement that. And getting better at delegating and utilizing that. Like, I pick rock stars for a reason,
Yeah.
and elevating people on our team to get to work together has been a lot of fun.
Like you, I struggle. I feel like I kind of go in ebbs and flows where, you know, I'm focusing more on training versus, you know, focusing more on business development. And it kind of goes with like the ebb and flow of my year of like athletes and
Mhm.
when they're in season, off season. So but similar to you, I have really good team behind me, right? And it's taken a long time to get there. And a lot of the work I've put into developing them has kind of I've won back more time to be able to do things like this too. So, and it's a constantly moving target, right? Like there's seasons of any business where you know you have to take more time, but I can definitely empathize with the challenges there. So
Yeah, it's hard. I don't think anybody has quite figured it out. I think like for us, and I know you can relate to this because you have athletes with seasons. What I try to do and what I encourage our team to do as well, like in Miami, everybody leaves in the summer. Every client travels
Hmm.
somewhere. And I'm like, take advantage of that. That's
Yeah.
your time to also travel. That's your time to like be okay with the schedule being lighter because you know what's gonna happen when August rolls around.
Yep.
So the more reps you have of like what your year starts to look like, you can also like zoom out and be like, okay, well, I know July, a lot of my clients are leaving. I'm just gonna do like my big trip that month, and I think that helps too.
Yeah, for many years, that's always kind of been our case here as well. So those are great points, and obviously, like anybody who's in the day to day running a business, but also really present with coaching athlete, it becomes a challenge because like you genuinely do care, but you also realize quickly that you know from a limiting factor, if you can't continue to grow a business, like it's going to inhibit your ability to serve more people, and that's why we get into this, right? Like there's a point where like always want to serve the person in front of us, but then it becomes, how do we use our business as a vehicle to help people at scale? And I think that's where in a service based industry, like we leverage the time of our team, right? Like we
Yeah.
can't, tech is challenging in this business. So it's like, we really got to get good at coaching people, giving them a own way to be successful in like a true career, because that, and otherwise like we'll coach them, they'll learn what they need to learn, and then they'll move on. And that becomes a challenge in and of itself as well.
I think that's such a good point. Like when we say at Old Bull that we want to change healthcare, we zoom out and we think of that for the provider too. And exactly as you said, like a career, like our type of setting, it looks more like a personal training model.
Hmm.
And those, I mean, we know that industry is so transient. A lot of people only stay for a short period of time and then go somebody somewhere else. So that's stuff that Frankie and I are thinking about constantly. Like, how do we create the experience where this is a better healthcare experience for our clinicians too, and they want to be able to stay and continue to grow with us. One of my favorite things is the interview process and finding people. Like I'm purposely finding people who are way better than me at so many things
Yeah.
because I want to be able to like as you were saying like be a vehicle for these people to shine and have the resources and the support for those skill sets that I lack that I want to find in other people. That's what I get really excited about.
Yeah. Just curious. So do you see, you said you have two facilities and another one coming. Do you see that like you find yourself pursuing those opportunities to help create opportunities for your team? Or is it also like you see an opportunity in the market where you feel like you can again continue to help people at scale, provide your model that's clearly working? And do you feel like it's kind of like two of those things?
I think of it kind of they're going along at the same time. Like if we see an opportunity in an area that we're like, this is definitely our market, this is definitely our demographic, that's a huge motivating factor. But yeah, I would say, especially as our team evolved and especially as we have people on the team who have been with us for 5 years, I'm constantly thinking and we're constantly thinking of how can we elevate those roles? How can we show that there is growth within this company and it's not just being a practitioner only forever? Like, what does that look like? What is the roadmap for people to be able to develop higher in their careers and stay long term and get something we're really proud of is just being a family and like how do we keep that environment
Hmm.
wanting people to be within it because everybody in our team is fantastic. They can do a lot of things.
Hmm.
So what do we do that keeps it so special that makes like Old Bull where they want to stay? And that's a big goal.
And it's a lofty goal, and but it's something worth creating because like for me, I want to elevate the lives of my athletes and my coaches, right? Like those are the two
Mhm.
people I serve now. For
Yeah.
many years, it was like I built a business for me, and I serve the
Yeah.
athlete in front of me. And I still coach, not as much, but now I see it as like, all right, I'm serving the athletes and the coaches that are coaching those athletes. So
100%. Yeah.
yeah, that definitely a very like big mind shift, and it took me a while to get there, but nonetheless, we're here, and my business is better for it. So
I think
um,
that's awesome. I think a lot of us start as kind of solo practitioners and don't maybe even think that we're going to
mhm,
do this. Like I remember when I had first started with Frankie and we were getting pretty busy and he looks at me and he's like, "You can hire somebody." And I was like, "What?" Like it just didn't even cross my mind.
yeah,
Like it just wasn't even a thing that I thought we were going to be doing. And lo and behold, I brought two people on who are still with us and they're just like
yeah.
rock stars. So, yeah, you almost just, like, get put in the position where it has to happen. You're like, "I didn't think I was gonna do this at all."
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that. So we touch business, and I want to pick your brain about like training theory and stuff like that, because a lot of the stuff I've consumed about what you have out there, it's you, like you have a really brilliant mind for it. And you touched on healthcare, right? And one of the courses you do is training is healthcare, right?
Mhm.
Say more about that, and like what are the like the big rocks and like goals that you have for that whole teaching that you're putting out there?
Yeah, so training is healthcare as basically I put together a bunch of questions that I kept getting from trainers in the industry coming to see me for their own injuries. And realizing that within our own industry, there's some gaps of maybe what trainers feel comfortable doing if their clients have pain or things they've heard that they're not allowed to do. And I just started to realize, like, oh, there's a lot of people aren't communicating between like the rehab side and the training side. I was just getting a lot of, like, similar questions, and it kinda sparked this idea of, like, "Oh, I think I'm onto something here. I think I have some sort of curriculum." And that's how Training as Healthcare started. It was directly related to what trainers were asking me. And from there, it's kind of evolved into I want the weekend to basically be a deep dive into all of the things that we can do as coaches, rehab providers, trainers, before we need to think of things in terms of, like, medical necessity for pain. And I think it's extremely timely and important because of just the advancement of the field of and fitness and how many more people are becoming trainers and coaches, that there's so much more, like, we can do before we ever have to refer out. And the things that I think are completely fair game and within the scope of training, how do we train around discomfort? How do we train somebody and build back qualities, kind of regardless of what their past injury history is? I hear stuff from, like, trainers all of the time, "Oh, this client had a previous meniscus tear. Do I just not squat them?" And how do we
Yeah.
navigate that and show, like, "Whoa, there's so many entry points you can find for this person, and you're gonna do an amazing job with them of getting them stronger before they would ever need to go anywhere else." So that's really what the whole course is about. The big principles are basically, how do we manage pain within training scope of practice? What are the principles for managing pain regardless of diagnosis? That's something that I kind of harp on a lot. Unless there's trauma or red flags, I really don't care about a diagnosis. I care more about the qualities that I need to get back to somebody while also elevating the stuff that they're already good at so they can keep a training stimulus high. So it's a lot of that type of stuff. How do we make sure we are not losing a training effect? We're not detraining our clients when they're injured. And then how do we find that entry point or on ramp for the thing they're having a hard time with? That's what we do every day at Old Bull. And that's what I'm really hoping at large the training industry and the rehab industry can just do a better job of.
As somebody who's kind of worked my way into doing more and more with athletes and clients coming off injury, dealing with pain, like, you're like, if you're coaching long enough, you're going to work with people that are in some type of pain. So, like, when you're working with these clients and athletes objectively, like, if I'm a strength coach, what are some of the guiding principles for me, like, in terms of, like, all right, what's acceptable pain versus what's pain that I should say, okay, I'm going to go refer you to RPT in house. Like, what kind of balance do you work with there?
Yeah, the main principles I think of are kind of ruling out red flags first and foremost. For a trainer scope of practice, I would consider red flags to be like there was an acute injury, there was sort of trauma, there was some sort of event that occurred. You have a client who played soccer over the weekend recreationally and they come in,
Hmm.
their knee is swollen and they're limping. That's yeah, like just let's do rehab or let's refer out for rehab for that. I think of it more of those chronic cases or people who we all have those clients who I had a disc herniation 20 years ago and my back still hurts. Okay, that's not a red flag case by any means. It's actually the perfect candidate for good training. So red flags is kind of like the very first thing that I care the most about. And then from there, another guiding principle for like kind of what pain is appropriate versus what is not. Main things like do you have like extreme range of motion limitations or extreme and obvious strength limitations that are associated with this pain? Is it something that feels worse and worse and worse the more you continue your activity? Is it something that gets super flared up after training? Those would be incidences where it'd be a good idea to collaborate. But otherwise, like the guiding thoughts that I kind of work with coaches to go through are, let's try to keep all of the things that they can tolerate at as like high of a stimulus as we can. So systemically, this person gets that benefit of the training effect. And then we're going to find those entry points or on ramps for things that don't feel good. That's where things like isometrics come into play. That's where using machines instead of free weights are a great option. That's where cutting the range of motion and limiting the load becomes a thing. Finding the best version of the movement that's hard for somebody. Like all of that is 100% within training scope of practice.
And to be honest, like you said, there's a lot of things that we can do as strength coaches that we don't need to be a physical therapist, that we can I love the term you use, entry points, right? Like
Mhm.
there's always something we can do, whether it's, manipulating range of motion, load, intensity, volume, like all that stuff. Like there's plenty of things that we can do on a regular basis with our clients that are like acceptable, right?
For sure.
So let's say, for example, like for you talked about a low back injury, right? Like everybody who's worked with anybody, like there's always low back
Yeah.
injuries. What are some, when you say entry points, what are some, if I'm working with somebody who, like, they come in, they're clearly having issues, what are some entry points that like you would tactically do with that individual to get them moving, and create some level of training stimulus on a day that is not ideal to do, like I have my program listed out for that athlete or that client during that day, like now I got to pivot. So
Yeah, yeah, I think pivoting is something that we all are forced to get good at because never once has something gone completely according to plan.
yeah,
Yeah, I find with low back pain in particular, I think one of the most important things, first and foremost, is just being very reassuring and being very, very clear in that today's goal is to utilize movement to kind of calm some stuff down and to get you feeling better. And that we're going to be able to explore some things today and just like get your body moving because the low back responds really well to that. I think like just being very reassuring first and foremost is huge. And then in terms of finding entry points for movement, I mean, usually for low back stuff, upper body is pretty fair game. That's always something that I'm going to harp on with people if they are really, kind of maybe even nervous about some lower body training. We're going to do a lot of upper body stuff that they feel good with, stuff that doesn't even make them think about their back. For entry points for the lower body, typically like a more upright squat pattern feels better. So that's where if you want to start with isometrics, that's an awesome place. I always tell people, especially people who are a little bit fearful with movement, isometrics are the first type of contraction that we're cleared to do after surgery. If it's safe post-operatively, it's totally safe for us. So I like to say that to kind of encourage people again, like this is okay. You're gonna feel muscles burning. It's all good. Um, and even just very like supported positions, like holding on to something for a split squat, stuff like that is a great entry point for lower body movements for people with low back pain. And then I'm always trying to be sneaky and I'm trying to find a way for them to hinge in some way where they might not even know it. One of my favorite positions is like a kickstand or a V stance or a staggered stance hinge that for most people doesn't even really look like a hinge and they don't really associate it with the fear that they might have around a deadlift. So that's a strategy I like. I also really love like a gorilla row with kettlebells where you're absolutely in a hinge, but one kettlebell stays on the ground while you row and you're switching each side. And people do not associate it with that type of movement. But we're kind of getting exposures and dosages into like their tissues experiencing that position of a hinge because they probably haven't been there in a very long time, so they're not gonna tolerate it super well. So, yeah, a lot of it is, like, reassurance, entry points and isometrics and small ranges and adding stability, and then kinda finding ways to, like, sneak in patterns that you know they need, but they might be fearful of.
almost doing it in a way that, like, covertly trying to integrate these things back into their movement inventory, and so that they're, because I think you like touch upon a little bit like how I think people who have low back injuries, they're constantly, like, from a psychological standpoint, like they're so fearful of moving through their spine, through their hips, like, and so almost tricking them in a way to so that they might not think, like, if you go, oh, we're going to deadlift, like, no, it's a hinge. It's like
Yeah,
we're going to choose movements that you don't cognitively associate with low back pain, and then use those as a way to kind of integrate. Talk about like the psychology you use with individuals, and how, like, sometimes that's like the biggest hurdle you have to get over with people.
for sure. Yeah, I think about it in a couple ways. I think about it from the psychological side and the physiological side. So, physiologically, people who have low back pain who tend to avoid bending over and hinging,
Hmm.
if you just think of the sheer fact that those tissues, their back extensors, their glutes, their hamstrings, are not used to being lengthened and they're not used to being lengthened with load.
Yeah.
And they are weaker because of not being in that position. And I mean, most people don't really even like the sensation of loading their back muscles, like, it's an uncomfortable thing for people. So, my thought process is always like, what's the maximal tolerable dose that I can give somebody to start to integrate movements and like expose their tissues to things they haven't been exposed to? So that's where like a kickstand hinge, where maybe even they're reaching out for a wall in front of them so they have support. And I'm just spending time breathing in those positions and holding isometrically. I'm just getting those tissues exposed to patterns they haven't been in. And it's non threatening too. So you're getting that like psychological benefit of it too. The day one with anybody that I have with history of low back pain, I'm finding some way to do that because it's that important to start early. And then when I think of psychologically, one of my mentors, Craig Liebenson, who's a chiropractor who has really like completely blown through the chiropractic industry, and he's movement based and he's extremely knowledgeable and physiologically based in what he does. And we talk about this stuff a lot with like the psychology side of it. And I think a lot of us who are passionate about this, we want to explain to people why this is safe and why this is beneficial. But he brings up a really good point when we talk about this, that, you know, we might not ever fully change somebody's beliefs about their fear of a deadlift. We don't have to spend so much time trying to convince people. I'd rather create an experience with movement that is positive, that violates their expectations, and they're going to more likely have a contextual, like much stronger grasp of what we've done than if I'm lecturing them, telling them that deadlifting is okay. So if I can create positions that challenge their expectations of like, man, I thought that was not going to feel good, or I didn't think I could do that, that is going to stick a lot more than like a pain science lecture.
Absolutely. Yeah, just gradually expose them to that load, that movement pattern like over time and just build quality reps, and then like that in and of itself will provide enough context for them to realize like, okay, this is safe to do.
Right.
Um whether it's in the gym or outside of the gym, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I love that. And it's like that's part of the art of coaching that's not really addressed. Like we always talk about physiology and like again, like what's if somebody has issues, what can we do? And what are some positive ways of creating adaptation? But oftentimes like that's something that's kind of glossed over and missed. And look, when you're dealing with people in pain, like that's something that has to be addressed, because like if they're always going to have that negative association with movement, like we're constantly fighting an uphill battle. So
Yeah, I think too when you consider just how much the of a relationship there is between people who experience musculoskeletal pain and their activity levels, we can't afford to waste time with people over explaining things and not just getting them moving. I think it's that serious. I think it's that important. We just have so much evidence now of even just people who are deconditioned, people who have metabolic issues, the relationships of their musculoskeletal pain experience, the quality of their tendons and their tissues. It all relates back to so much about just like sedentary lifestyle and just not being as deconditioned or not being as conditioned. And I think that's where a lot of our lens at Old Bull has shifted into, okay, well, how can I just make this human a fitter human? Because that's going to move the needle the most, instead of like zooming in on this one tissue that hurts them. It's like, let's zoom out and change them as a whole rather than getting so specific.
yeah, and that's from a long-term standpoint, that's how you continue to, hedge their risk against any other future injuries. So,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So, we kind of touched on individuals who are like coming back from injury, dealing with pain. Let's talk about like quote unquote healthy people, right? Like, I mean, I say that in quotes because people who have trained their whole lives, who've had like a really extensive training age, like myself and yourself, like we're always having to modify. Like there's probably, I can't remember the last time I stepped in a gym, did a workout and felt like 100%.
Right.
So how are you addressing like day to day with those athletes and those clients?
Yeah, we definitely see like a full spectrum of people who are kind of on that end as well. Or honestly, it's like coaching people like ourselves where there's
Hmm.
nothing really wrong. It's just stuff kind of like aches here and there just because of how long we've been doing this stuff. For me, the biggest thing that I find to be so important to address and really understand is somebody's program. I think that's what gives us a ton of information. Like when I'm working with people, with everybody, but if I have somebody who is quite healthy and overall training relatively normally, that's where I think it's an opportunity to make sure we dissect what their exercise program is, what their intensities are, what their volume is, what their week. I always ask people like, walk me through what your average week of exercise looks like, so I can get a feel for what movement patterns are they expressing their, or are they doing, are they exposing their body to? what proportion of movement patterns are they giving their body? Is there stuff where all of a sudden we realize like, oh, you're doing like a lot of this pattern and then maybe less exposure here? What is their volume like? What is their intensity like? So many people, especially who've been training a long time, I think don't realize that we can take advantage of minimum effective dose and do a little bit less with higher intent without running ourselves into the ground. Or, I mean, I get this a lot with women who are in a frustrating time where they feel like they're training a lot, but they're not seeing the changes that they want. And mostly it's a conversation about that relationship between the volume and the intensity that they're doing. So I find this to be hugely important for everybody, but for people who are kind of looking to like optimize what they're doing and they're already relatively healthy, there's so much info I get from programs. I think that is probably one of the biggest conversations I have with clients, whether they're experiencing pain or not. Just like talk me through what you're doing. I need to know what you kind of you're exposing your body to. And, does what you're exposing your body to relate at all to the goals that you came in and told me you had? I'm sure you run into that a lot too.
Yeah.
People have very specific goals and then you kind of dissect what they're doing and it's like, well, none of them are challenging the same energy system that you care about, or challenging the movement patterns, or getting you to the intensity that would be appropriate for that goal. So let's unpack that and figure that out together.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's sometimes a challenging conversation, but like that's part of what, like, you can only create an opportunity for people if you understand, like, one, what their goals are, what they've done, and how are we aligned, are those things aligned, or is there like a big alignment with that stuff? And I've heard you talk about how, like, a lot of the, when people are training, there's two kind of faults. Like, it's either they're overtraining, right, or they're underdeveloped, like they're under prepared for a lot of the things. And generally it's those two things that, in the quote unquote healthy population, that's leading people into issues. Talk a little bit more about those two things and how, maybe some of the questions you're talking through people, and you kind of addressed it already, but how do you look at those things in people who are like, come to you and say, I'm training, I'm not getting the results I want, and here's what's going on.
Yeah, I definitely I like finding patterns in people, and one of the biggest patterns that have found is exactly what you said, like kind of the under preparation, undertrained, underdeveloped side of things, or the other end of the spectrum, overdoers, overtrainers.
Yeah.
People tend to fall on either end of that.
Yeah.
When I'm speaking with somebody who's more on like the underprepared side, a lot of it will usually be things like I kind of like I mentioned, like they're not really training at appropriate RPEs for what goal that they have, or they're just simply not doing enough of the thing that they want to be able to get to, or they're not exposing their bodies enough to kind of what the challenges are that would be required for their goal activity. I see this a lot in people who like want to become more athletic and they're not really doing anything that's jumping related. They're not doing anything with power components. They're not doing anything like being very explosive, and they're typically not like even loading heavy enough. And those qualities of athleticism, of quickness, of springiness, those aren't going to come with more traditional modes of training. So I see that a lot for that particular population. I also see that with people who create goals of running and they kind of went 0 to 100 because they haven't ran in a very long time. And the thought of running, like, we kind of always just think we have it in the tank. And it's like, oh, the first run I did, a 3 mile run, that is so much time jumping on one leg compared to what you've done in a very long time. And just, like, not doing, like, those prerequisites before getting to where they wanna be. But then on the other end of the spectrum, like, I see this a lot in people in the industry who come and see us, people like ourselves, where we tend to kind of overdo it a bit. A lot of this, I see with every training session is RPE 8 or 9. Everything they're doing is high intensity always. They're sprinting multiple times a week, they're lifting heavy, they're doing several group fitness classes, they do Pilates twice a week, and they just have, like, a ton of things going on all of the time. And I tend to also see that a lot of these individuals, are sacrificing quality for volume, and they're getting just a lot done, but it's not extremely quality work, and r I would argue, like, anybody in this bucket it's harder to work with than somebody where you need to elevate and develop qualities. When you need to take somebody who's used to training, 12 days a week, you need to somehow peel that back and create buy-in of why this is so important. I think that's a very hard thing. People who are used to training with high volume all of the time don't quite understand often that if I peel back volume, the work that I'm doing can be better and get a better stimulus. But a lot of us are kind of conditioned to think that more is better, and more isn't better, better is better. Like, how do I get the quality improved? I'll try to often even show people my own training program because I don't think they believe me that it's very low volume, but it's hard. Like, one of my leg days has 4 movements, but it's really hard instead of 15 movements with 20-pound dumbbells. I think that's people run into that stuff a
Yeah.
lot and are wondering why stuff isn't getting better.
Yeah, that's and you nailed it. I think it's much harder to dial people back and throttle people back who are obsessive about this than it is to kind of nudge people into more. So it kind of leads me to my next question, and these probably go hand in hand, especially with people who are overdoers and obsessive. Is from a recovery standpoint, rather than just, I think a lot of, like, right now, everything is in vogue in terms of like cool modalities about recovery, cold plunge, heat exposure, all these types of things. But I know you preach a lot of, like, there's other ways that are less sexy and more practical ways. Talk a little bit about how, like, recovery components can help, especially people who are overdoing it, and how you kind of operationalize that with your clients.
Yeah, my bias is always going to be that modifying training variables and load management are going to be the biggest things that move the needle for recovery. It's super not sexy and not exciting, and I can't really like sell it
Yeah.
in the same way. That's still gonna always be what my recommendations are. Most issues that people run into from feeling under recovered come down to just poor load management and programming errors rather than like, "Oh god, I just need to cold plunge. There we go. That's everything
Yeah.
that I need to do." Um, I'm always like, I always tell people very honestly, like, I'm very agnostic when it comes to recovery modalities. Most of them aren't gonna hurt you.
Yeah.
If there's not a risk or a threat, go for it. I'll be honest and say that most of them, they're kind of trying to achieve the same goal, which is temporary, like, nervous system inhibition and blood flow.
Hmm.
Nothing wrong with that at all. There's not a problem with temporary pain relief, and there's not a problem with just, I don't know, maybe taking some time out of your day to just, like, chill out.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely not against that, but, I'll always just be honest with people and say the things that are gonna move the needle more are gonna be what we're dialing and playing around with your program. For people who train really, really hard, I'd say that recovery modalities are more appropriate. A concept of kind of like earning your recovery. Like if you really are training quite hard, I think there's more of an argument for doing some of these things. Like I have some kids who come in and I was a rower, so I work with a lot of rowers. And one of the things, if you know anything about rowing, it's just that like the practice schedule is brutal. And like the hours we put in are just pretty insane. So every now and then I'll have a kid who comes to me and he just like looks just dead inside. And we're supposed to do S&C work together that day,
Yeah.
and I see him and I'm like, "Man, we're gonna do some, like, mobility and breathing.
Yeah.
We're gonna talk about anything other than rowing. We're gonna have fun,
Yeah.
and I might even put you in the recovery boots at the end so you can chill out." Like, being able to see when somebody truly is kind of on the cusp of overtraining or some of these youth athletes where I'm just like, "Just sit down for a second, like, let me get you a protein shake and relax." So there's a time and a place for this stuff, of course.
Yeah, it's almost the dichotomy between the individuals who are in pain, who are trying to, like, slowly, like, associate with the quality movement, and, like, showing them and getting them building context is what's going to get them to believe you and be feel safe, as it is with people who are, like, overtraining. Like, hey, let's, like, just believe me, let's pull
Yeah.
back some volume, like, just trust me, it's going to take some time, but I promise you, you'll feel the difference. And again, through context, people start to realize the value in these things, and it's like it's
Yeah.
like two ends of the spectrum, but it's like the challenges are very similar in a lot of regards.
That's such a good point. Yeah, like the challenge is the same. It's just one extreme
Yeah.
to the other. I'm sure you can relate to this too. I find being open with our clients and our athletes about things that we have struggled with
Yeah.
helps a lot. I'm sure like most athletes, I have overtrained myself so many times and had the very clear physical symptoms of all of these things and tried everything, and ultimately of course what made the most sense was peeling things back and gradually
Yeah.
ramping up. And I think just being like vulnerable with our own issues in training and our own athletic backgrounds and things that we've gone through, I think that helps a lot. Because I
Yeah.
think a lot of people who come to see us, because they're so zoomed in and it's so troublesome to them, they think they're the only person who has experienced this. And not to take away from anybody's experience, but more of just normalizing some things like, "Hey, I actually think I can relate, and I wanna, like, share with you something that I've been through," and I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, the empathy factor goes a long way, especially, when you're talking to an individual and you're like, "Look, I've been through the same thing. I understand what you're going through." And from a language standpoint, from just like an overall like sense of like again empathy, like athletes, people like, and again, I associate with a lot of other men my age who played sports for years, who love to train hard. And look, I'm 42. I have to train differently than I did
Yeah.
even 5 years ago, but that doesn't mean like I still don't train hard. I just have to figure out ways of doing it that's appropriate for me now. And look, I had to go through those challenges to deal with that. But now I can speak a little bit more candidly to individuals who are perhaps going through the same thing. So
I think people assume that because we're in this industry and we've been in it for a long time, that we train perfectly and we never have issues. So there's a lot of times when I'll share something with somebody and I can see the surprise, like, "Oh,
yeah.
you have pain too?" I'm like, "Of course I
Yes.
do." And I think that's super important to show people because I think they really think that we just train and feel nothing and everything is perfect and we've never had to make adjustments and because we do it right and we're in the industry, but that's not true at all.
So somebody who's been from lecturing and teaching coaches, physical therapists for a long time, somebody who's new coming into this world, right? And has, you know, has not been wise to like working with people and trying to build context. What are some of like the biggest myths you're trying to dispel in your teachings with when it comes to educating people in this field?
Yeah, a couple things stand out to me. I think the first one is just that, like, not all pain equals harm. I think that's a huge thing that, obviously the general public has a hard time with, but I still think within our profession alone, people have a hard time with, and that I don't think that pain and fixing people's pain should be our main goal. I think improving people's function and making them smile and having fun and, promoting, like, a really good stimulus for physiological change should be our goal. We were taught in PT school that, like, pain is the 5th vital sign, and we were taught to ask it every 5 seconds. 0 to 10, what does that feel like to you? 0 to 10, what does that feel like to you? And all that does is continually keep pain at the forefront of somebody's mind who already is having a psychologically hard time detracting themselves from their pain experience. So, I purposefully try to really, like, speak a lot less about pain when I'm working with somebody and a lot more about this is what we're doing today. This is what we're working on today. We're exploring movement today. We're finding things that feel tolerable to you. And I think that changes the conversation a lot. I would say that's like one of the biggest things. A second thing that I care a lot about is not thinking of form as being correct or incorrect or dangerous or not dangerous. I try to teach utilizing form as a tool to hit a certain target tissue or to work on a pattern that's related to a goal and being okay with the variability that will be present. I think of form as being very fluid and there being a form for each person that feels best for them and targets the tissues that we care about most, rather than it being, you're doing this wrong, or this isn't the way that I wanted you to do it, or this is correct or incorrect. That's a hard one too, because I think when we're first taught about a lot of things, we're taught very black and white of
Hmm.
if you don't lift in a neutral spine, you're going to explode. And like all of these things, these very extreme claims. And like if your knee ever goes over your toes, you're going to die. But now people say it's okay. So I'm going to go from
Yeah.
never doing it to doing a pistol squat every day.
Yeah.
Um, so I think just like really harping on form as a tool, form is how we can achieve movements, form is gives us options. Like people who are really good athletes, it's because they have a lot of options for how they can get in and out of positions based on what their own body can do, what somebody who is covering them is putting pressure on, the change of direction that they might have to do. Like form gives us options, and I just want a lot of options for people, and I don't really care if it's perfect or not.
In the athletic world, like not every, like I don't think you repeat one movement, even like a sport like baseball, which I coach a ton of baseball athletes. Like the amount of variability in throwing one pitch is just infinite, and so getting athletes exposed to different ways of doing things. Like obviously, yes, there's an optimal way, but yeah, I really I love that. So
Think people take it, to a bit of an extreme too of like, I'm not gonna make somebody new to exercise do a Jefferson curl for their first deadlift, but
Yeah,
that just to prove a point that, like, spinal flexion is safe, but I do think by and large, like, the argument of having, like, some wiggle room for how stringent we are is very, very important, but there's still probably patterns that are gonna feel more, like, comfortable for somebody newer to exercise too. So I
yeah,
think that's always, like, an important distinction because I'm a movement optimist for sure, and I want people to, like, move in funky positions. The very first time, like, Karen from accounting is learning how to lift, I'm probably gonna put her in a position that I'm like, "Ooh, I think she's gonna feel more of her glutes and her hamstrings with this deadlift." Ooh, as my I'm too excited, my headphone came out. Um, and I'm probably gonna get her to feel, like,
yeah.
safe here, and we don't have to start with, like, spinal flexion deadlift day 1. So I think there's nuance to all of it.
Yeah, and that nuance probably comes along with somebody who's been at it for a little bit while longer, and maybe what they need is less rigidity, right, in the way they train, and more variability. Probably
Yeah.
somebody like myself. So
Right, you're like, "Huh, taking notes for
yeah,
myself."
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I those are two great points. I think, the not all pain equals is harm, and then, using form and function as like more like a proxy to just getting you exposed to a lot of different movement variables is really valuable information. So my last question for you is, like, this is selfishly for me. I have twin daughters who are 12.
Okay.
And like they're getting into training, like they're starting to show interest and things like that. It's a tough world for young, like middle school age girls. There's just a lot of information that they're flooded with about, like, body image and stuff like that. Like, if they were listening, which they're going to listen to this, is what would you, like, 12-year-old you, what would help you going and navigating through this whole process, knowing what you know now?
Oh, that's such a good question. I would say to find things that you get excited about, like, improving upon and make that your focus. I think something that was really cool to me because I started training, like, lifting heavy in the gym at, like, 13 and 14 as well,
Awesome.
and I quickly just became very excited that, like, "Oh, I could do this? This is so cool." And I really encourage to think more about it from that perspective of just, like, how much fun can I have with this? How much, like, stronger can I get? Instead of it being tied to, like, the aesthetic
Yeah.
side of things. I think that's the hardest thing, like, as for anybody, but especially for young
Yes.
girls. I think girls now are the cool thing is there's a lot more exposure to, like, training and
Yeah.
being more athletic and fit rather than when I was growing up, it was like, if you looked like anything other than Kate Moss, get
Yes.
away. Like,
Yeah.
so I think at least there's a positive spin, in my opinion, of being exposed to more, like, really strong, awesome, athletic women as role models. But yeah, make it like get excited about getting strong and taking up space and being able to do things and being a badass. Like, it's exciting to be a woman with strength. Like, I think it's my favorite thing. It's my favorite thing to encourage others to do. So if you found something that you started to get interested in, like, run with it and have fun.
I think it's whether it's in the context of sport or just training in general. You, like you said, you did it through rowing, and they've shown some affinity for playing sports, but most of which I just want them to have a love for training, and an appreciation. Similar, like you said, it's like, don't be addicted to the results. Like anything, right? You have to be enjoy the process of it, right?
Yeah.
And that was what got me into training so many years ago, is that I was like a kid who I just couldn't focus on anything. And then once I realized, like, training was like the starting point and the entry point where, like, oh, if I just put any, like, consistent effort towards anything, school, sports, training, like, I'm starting to see results. And so that was like the domino that fell and then just helped every aspect of my life. So I think
I
that's why
love
it's
that.
so important. But well,
I
I
agree.
appreciate that. I think that's something where, whether you're a young boy or a young girl, like, I like getting involved in something that you're passionate about is like a lifelong pursuit that will bring dividends. So
Couldn't
awesome.
agree more. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Katie, this was awesome. Really enjoyed talking to you. If people want to find more out about what you're doing and, the courses you teach, where can they do that?
Instagram's always the best place. Our Oldville Athletics page or my personal page, I'm sure we can include those in
Yep,
the bio or something, but
sure.
that's the best place. That's where anything that we're doing in terms of seminars or courses or educational opportunities, that's where you'll find them.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. If you've gotten any value from the show, please share it and subscribe if you haven't. Katie, thanks so much.
Thank you.